India's true destiny is to be the guru of the world, the mother. When analyzing any religion in comparative theology, it is customary to begin by defining its general conception of the understanding of God. Monotheism is the belief in a single God, polytheism in multiple gods, pantheism in an absolute, impersonal, and immanent form of God, manifesting as the universe itself, monism in the ultimate unity of all reality as one essence, and panentheism in a single God who is both transcendent and immanent. However, when approaching Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, through Western concepts, creating an unambiguous definition is extremely difficult. First, Hinduism has its own systems of philosophical analysis, which are detailed in the Vedanta schools and are divided according to the nature of the interaction and relationship of the soul with God. Second, the fact is that Hinduism is not a single, strictly regulated religion, but rather a vast and evolving synthesis of philosophies, sects, and traditions of Bharat, India, all based upon the principles of Dharma, the cosmic order and law. An external observer may mistakenly regard Hinduism as polytheistic because of its multitude of deities, but polytheism is less characteristic of Hinduism than it may appear. Deities in Hindu traditions are usually understood as aspects of the same supreme reality, Brahman, or as manifestations, incarnations, or avatars of that same supreme deity. Consequently, within Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, one may find monotheistic traditions centered on a single personal supreme being, Saguna Brahman, such as Vishnu, Shiva, or Devi, non-dual or monistic philosophies that regard the universe as a manifestation of the impersonal, absolute, nirguna Brahman, yet also affirm its transcendence, and panentheistic views that emphasize both the immanence and transcendence of the divine. But in less orthodox directions, in tribal and clan cults blended with Hinduism, one can also encounter henotheism as a transitional stage between animism and polytheism on the one hand, and monotheism on the other, where many deities are acknowledged, but worship is focused on only one. At the same time, Hinduism's origins are indeed rooted in the ancient Vedic traditions, which are known for their polytheistic and henotheistic character. So let us begin with the Vedic religion, the precursor to what we now know as Hinduism. It is important to clarify the terminology right away. Sanatana Dharma is often regarded as synonymous with Hinduism. However, while Hinduism refers to a particular historical phase in the evolution of the Dharmic traditions, Sanatana Dharma, meaning eternal Dharma, embraces the entire continuum of Dharma's development, from the early Vedic period through the transitional Brahmanic stage, and into what later came to be known as Hinduism. Although, strictly speaking, Sanatana Dharma is not limited even to the Vedic period. It is understood as timeless and beginningless, existing before the Vedas themselves. The foundations of Vedic civilization can be traced to the early Indo-Aryan culture that emerged in the northwestern regions of the Indian subcontinent. Following the gradual migration and settlement of Indo-Aryan-speaking peoples from Central Asia around 2000 to 1500 before Common Era. This developing culture arose through the interaction of Indo-Iranian traditions with the older religious and symbolic heritage of the Indus Valley civilization and various local folk cults. The spiritual and cultural expressions of this synthesis are preserved in the Vedas, the most ancient and revered scriptures of India, which not only gave their name to the entire era spanning roughly 1500 to 500 before Common Era, but also laid the foundations of later Hindu philosophy, ritual, and cosmology. The Vedas are regarded not as human compositions, but as Shruti, that which was heard through divine revelation. According to tradition, the sages, rishis, and rishikas perceived these hymns in deep states of spiritual realization and transmitted them orally for generations before they were compiled and systematized by the sage Vyasa. Broadly speaking, all sacred texts of India are divided into Shruti, those heard by the seers in divine revelation, and Smriti, remembered traditions, laws, and teachings often inspired by or based on Shruti. The Vedas primarily constitute the first category. Shruti, the vast body of later Hindu literature, is generally classified as Smriti. Although the Vedas are the foundational scriptures for all orthodox, Astika schools of Hindu philosophy, Smriti texts are interpreted more selectively and hold varying degrees of authority within each tradition. The Vedas are composed in such a way that they are divided into 4 parts, with the first and most ancient, the Rig Veda, forming the foundation for the other 3 Vedas, the Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. The Rig Veda is a collection of ancient hymns in praise of various deities who personify natural and cosmic forces, such as Agni, fire, Indra, lord of the heavens and wielder of thunder, Varuna, guardian of moral and cosmic order, and Surya, the sun. The Yajur Veda consists mainly of mantras and ritual formulas to be used by priests during sacrificial ceremonies. The Samaveda contains hymns adapted for melodic chanting. The Atharva Veda includes spells, charms, and practical prayers for healing, protection, and daily well-being. Each of the 4 Vedas is further divided into 4 sections: the Samhitas, collections of hymns and mantras; the Brahmanas, prose commentaries explaining rituals; the Aranyakas, philosophical reflections connected to forest meditation practices; and the Upanishads, spiritual discourses exploring the nature of reality. Among these, the Upanishads form the concluding portion of each Veda and focus on profound philosophical questions concerning the nature of the self, Atman, and the ultimate reality, Brahman. Underlying the diverse expressions of Hindu thought is a shared philosophical foundation shaped largely by the Upanishads. Here emerge the concepts of karma, the moral law of cause and effect; samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth; and moksha, liberation from that cycle. These ideas, first articulated in the late Vedic period, later became unifying principles across the many schools of Dharmic philosophy. In total, more than 200 Upanishads are known today, although Vedanta philosophy traditionally recognizes 10 principal ones, Mukhya Upanishads. Most were composed between approximately 800 before Common Era and 200 Common Era, with a few appearing later. In the post-Vedic era, the sacred literature of Hinduism expanded beyond the 4 Vedas, Shruti or revealed texts, to include numerous Smriti, remembered texts, such as the Puranas, Idihasas, Dharmashastras, Vedangas, Upavedas, Tantras, and Agamas, although some later traditions may have regarded their scriptures as equal in authority to the Shruti. During this period, the primary custodians of spiritual authority were the Brahmins, who alone possessed direct access to the Vedas. Knowledge of the Vedas gradually became restricted to this priestly class, while members of other Varnas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, as well as women, were largely excluded from direct study or ritual use of the Vedic texts. And yet, even this post-Vedic religion in its early form can hardly be called Hinduism as we understand it today. Therefore, this period is generally referred to as Brahmanism. The influence of Brahmanism profoundly shaped the social and religious life of India, particularly through the authority of post-Vedic texts such as the Dharmashastras and the legal and ethical precepts codified in the Manusmriti, assigning the exclusive birthright to spirituality to the Brahmins. In response to the dominance of Brahmanism, the shramana movement became an alternative for those seeking spiritual fulfillment beyond the constraints of Brahmanic norms, rejecting rigid social stratification and denying the Brahmins' exclusive claim to spiritual authority. Lacking access to the Vedas, the Shramanas also rejected their authority, though they upheld certain universal dharmic principles. The Shramanas were typically wandering ascetics who developed independent, often non-centralized philosophies emphasizing personal realization and renunciation. As a result, Brahmanism and the Shramana movement formed the two principal branches of the Indian dharmic heritage: Astika, recognizing the authority of the Vedas, and Nastika, rejecting it, from which later developed numerous Hindu philosophical schools, darshanas, and independent religions. From within the Nastika Shramana movement, religions such as Buddhism and Jainism eventually emerged and were systematized. Brahmanism, as the dominant religious and social system built around the authority of the Vedas and the Brahmins, gradually lost its exclusive influence during the 5th to 4th centuries before Common Era, particularly in northern India. The spread of monastic institutions, wandering ascetics, and the systematized philosophies of the Shramanas drew large followings and shifted popular allegiance away from strict Brahmanic ritualism. Kings and lay populations increasingly patronized Buddhist and Jain institutions, which also provided social services such as education and healthcare, further undermining Brahmanical dominance. Furthermore, throughout this period, local, tribal, and village religious traditions persisted, often developing independently of Vedic Brahmanism, and in some cases even preceding it. These traditions worshipped local deities, spirits, and natural forces, and incorporated folk rituals, festivals, and ancestral cults, circumventing the Brahmin monopoly on ritual acts. In many villages, non-Brahmin priests, known as pujaris, conducted rituals and ceremonies, while in Kerala, oracles called velichapadu served as intermediaries between the divine and the community. Particularly significant were the cults of the Gramadevatas, village deities, and Kuladevatas, family or clan deities. The worship of Gramadevatas was common throughout India, from the south to the north. These deities typically served as guardians and protectors of villages, appearing in both male and female forms. Between approximately 500 and 600 before Common Era, a period often referred to as the Hindu synthesis, these local and tribal traditions were gradually integrated into the broader religious framework of India. During this time, the Puranas and other Smriti texts systematized and codified the diverse folk practices, assigning village and clan deities specific roles within a unified pantheon alongside major gods such as Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi. The Gramadevata and Kuladevata became manifestations or attendants of the supreme deities, preserving their significance in village and clan life while connecting them to a pan-Indian religious structure. Overall, India's spiritual landscape must be understood as a living, intersecting environment in which traditions mutually influenced and shaped each other, both contributing to and drawing from one another. The term Hindu synthesis essentially refers to the integration of multiple strands of Indian religious life, including intellectual and ethical elements from Shramana traditions, as well as folk and village practices, into a coherent, overarching system. The result of this synthesis was a syncretic and flexible religious environment that laid the foundation for what we now recognize as classical Hinduism, capable of unifying a wide diversity of spiritual beliefs and practices. Within Hinduism, the spiritual universe is often understood through the worship of three principal deities, each regarded as supreme within different traditions: Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi, or Shakti. All local and village deities were ultimately identified with them, as their minor forms, as incarnations, as manifestations of their aspects, or sometimes as their synonyms. All these central deities, Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi not only bear numerous names and forms, but also manifest through various avatars, aspects, and emanations. In Vaishnavism, the Supreme Being is regarded as Vishnu, the preserver and sustainer of the universe. Vishnu is venerated in countless regional forms, such as Venkateshwara, Jagannatha, Vithoba, or Vithala, and Dev Narayan, as well as in theological forms like Narayana and Purushottama. Moreover, he is worshipped through his 10 principal incarnations, Dashavatara, including Matsya and Narasimha, with Rama and Krishna being especially revered as expressions of his divine presence in the world. In Shaivism, Shiva is revered as the Supreme Lord, appearing in myriad forms that express his multifaceted nature. Mahadeva, the fierce Rudra, the cosmic dancer Nataraja, and Dakshinamurti, who embodies his aspect as the universal guru. Among the tutelary deities, Gramadevatas, are figures such as Ayappan, Karupasamy, Kandoba, Murugan, and Munisvarar. In Natha yogic traditions, Shiva is honored as the first yogi, Adiyogi, the primordial source of yogic wisdom. In tantric traditions, he manifests as Bhairava, the fierce protector and destroyer of ignorance. The Agamas further enumerate numerous ritual and symbolic forms of Shiva, traditionally classified as the Pancha Vimshati Murti, the 25 principal aspects, each reflecting a distinct divine attribute and mode of worship. In Shaktism, the Divine Mother, Devi or Shakti, is worshipped as the ultimate reality, the source of all energy and power. She manifests in forms such as Durga, Kali, Parvati, and Bhairavi, as well as in countless local and folk expressions. In Tamil folk traditions, she is venerated as the mother goddess Mariamman, Amman, and in many villages she is revered as the tutelary deity, Gramadevata. Among her numerous village and regional manifestations are Bahuchara Mata, Kodiyar Ma, Meldi Ma, Santoshi Ma, and Nagbai Ma. Among her most renowned forms are the 10 Mahavidyas, the tantric goddesses who embody different aspects of the Divine Mother's power and wisdom. In both Shaktism and Shaivism, the dynamic relationship between the Divine Mother and Shiva is central. Shiva and Shakti, or in their tantric form, Bhairava and Bhairavi, represent the harmonious union of consciousness and manifested power, with Shiva and Shakti occupying dominant roles in worship in Shaivism and Shaktism, respectively. Shiva, in turn, together with Parvati, is regarded as the father of Ganesha and Kartikeya, also known as Murugan, Kaumaram, or Skanda, two of the most beloved deities in South India. In Hindu thought, the divine is often expressed through the three interrelated cosmic functions of creation, preservation, and dissolution. The concept of the Trimurti, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer or transformer, embodies this triadic vision of the divine at work in the universe. Although it is not a widely accepted form of the deity in popular temple devotion, it has found expression in the Nath tradition, where Dattatreya is revered as the Adi Guru and considered an incarnation of the Trimurti, embodying the synthesis of these cosmic functions in a single divine form, confirming the diversity of divine forms and their application in different traditions. Complementing the Trimurti is the Tridevi, the feminine counterparts and energies, Shakti, of the three gods. Saraswati is identified with wisdom and creative knowledge and is regarded as the consort of Brahma. Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity and fortune, is venerated as the consort of Vishnu, and Parvati, embodying strength and power, is worshipped as the consort of Shiva. Together, they represent the dynamic unity of consciousness and energy that sustains all manifestation. The synthesis of the masculine and feminine principles is deeply woven into Hindu theology and iconography. In Shaiva traditions, the union of Shiva and Shakti, consciousness and power, is regarded as the realization of liberation, moksha, often expressed through the androgynous form of Ardhanarishvara, which unites both principles within a single being. The image of Krishna with his beloved Radha is another central and deeply significant representation of the masculine and feminine principles in Vaishnava thought, where their love expresses the most intimate relationship between the divine and the soul. Radha, venerated as a central focus of devotion in many Vaishnava traditions, personifies Krishna's energy of bliss, Hladini Shakti, and embodies the soul's deepest love and longing for union with the divine. Krishna represents the supreme reality that fulfills and reflects that love. Their eternal union is seen both as a symbol of divine love within the heart and as the cosmic harmony of the Lord and his energy, the unity of the lover and the beloved in the Lila, divine play, of creation. Another, though less widely known androgynous form, is Vaikuntha Kamalaja, a composite of Vishnu and his consort Lakshmi, symbolizing the unity and non-duality of the masculine and feminine principles within the cosmic order. This form is especially characteristic of Tantric Vaishnavism, particularly in North India, Kashmir, and Nepal, where the synthesis of Vishnu and Lakshmi, akin to that of Shiva and Shakti, embodies the non-dual balance of divine consciousness and energy. Advaitic thought likewise presents synthetic forms such as Harihara, the union of Vishnu, Hari, and Shiva, Hara, in a single divine aspect, reflecting the essential unity underlying all manifestations of the divine. Although Brahma holds a central role in cosmology as the creator, he has relatively few temples and a limited cult of worship. By contrast, Vishnu and Shiva remain the principal deities of popular devotion, alongside the great goddess in her many forms. Typically, in these traditions, Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi appear not only in their manifest, anthropomorphic forms, but also in transcendental aspects, particularly in advanced metaphysical interpretations. In their transcendental aspects, Devi appears as Adi Parashakti, Mahadevi or Tripura Sundari, Shiva as Paramashiva, and Vishnu as Mahavishnu. Often, these higher aspects are identified with Parabrahman. However, the interpretation of Parabrahman itself varies among different traditions. In many Shaiva and Shakta schools, as well as in Advaita Vedanta, Parabrahman is identified with Nirguna Brahman, the absolute reality beyond qualities, gunas, while Saguna Brahman corresponds to the manifest personal forms of the deity. Conversely, several Vaishnava schools, such as Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita, Madhva's Dvaita, and Gaudiya Vaishnavism, revere Vishnu as Parabrahman, the highest personal reality, identified with Saguna Brahman, while viewing the impersonal Nirguna Brahman as a partial or incomplete aspect of that same supreme being. In the Mahabharata, Vishnu reveals to Arjuna his universal and cosmic form, Vishvarupa or Virat Purusha, which discloses the totality of existence as pervaded and sustained by him. Shiva, in his grand cosmic aspects as Sadashiva or Panchamukha, the five-faced Lord, represents his five-fold divine powers: creation, preservation, dissolution, concealment, and grace. He is also described as Ashtamurti, the eightfold manifestation that pervades the elements and the universe itself. Similarly, in her transcendental aspect as Mahadevi, or Adi Parashakti, she is the primordial Shakti, the dynamic and self-luminous power of the Absolute, who animates and manifests the universe, while encompassing within herself all forms of divinity and the potential of creation. Thus, the Puranic pantheon represents a vast and intricate system in which the great gods coexist with regional deities, goddesses, and local manifestations, integrating the immense diversity of Indian religious traditions into a unified theological and devotional whole. It is important to note, however, that most of these supreme deities are not direct Vedic prototypes and are either not mentioned at all in the Vedas or mentioned only in passing, and became firmly established only in the later Puranic texts. Over time, the principal Vedic gods, such as Indra, Agni, and Varuna, were assimilated into subordinate or supporting roles within the cosmology of the Puranas, reflecting the transformation of Indian religion from its Vedic to its classical Hindu form. Thus, the spiritual and mythological foundations, the Hindu synthesis, were preserved and elaborated in the Smriti literature, particularly in the Puranas, composed and compiled over many centuries, roughly from the early centuries before Common Era to the end of the first millennium Common Era. The Puranas systematized myth, theology, cosmology, and ethics, bringing together Vedic, folk, and regional traditions into a single narrative framework. Each Purana typically centers on one of the major deities, Vishnu, Shiva, or Devi, while incorporating stories of creation, divine incarnations, cosmological cycles, and moral teachings. Through the Puranas, Brahmanical religion absorbed local cults and practices, giving them a place within a coherent mythological order. Thus, village goddesses were identified as forms of Devi, local heroes as incarnations of Vishnu or Shiva, and regional rituals as expressions of universal Dharma. The Puranic corpus thereby served as the textual foundation for the Hindu synthesis, translating the diversity of Indian religious life into a shared cultural and theological vision. Other important Smriti texts, such as the Dharma Shastras, foremost among them the Manusmriti, codified social duties, ethical conduct, and the principles of Varna and Ashrama, exerting a lasting influence on the moral and legal thought of Indian society. The great epics, texts of the Smriti known as the Itihasas, particularly the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, combined mythic narrative with ethical and philosophical reflection, serving as living texts of Dharma for all classes. Within the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, emerges as a central scripture, articulating enduring teachings on action, devotion, and knowledge that have profoundly shaped the traditions of yoga, bhakti, and Vedanta. Parallel to these, the Tantras and Agamas developed as specialized theological and ritual manuals devoted to particular deities. While the Puranas present mythological narratives and cosmologies that integrate local cults into a unified religious framework, the Tantras and Agamas serve primarily as liturgical and esoteric texts, prescribing methods of worship, initiation, meditation, and temple construction. The Tantras emphasize inner spiritual transformation and esoteric ritual, especially within the Shakta tradition, whereas the Agamas form the ritual and doctrinal foundation of Shaiva and Vaishnava worship, notably in the Pancharatra and Vaikhanasa schools. Sutras form another important category of Smriti texts, composed in a concise aphoristic style and covering a wide range of subjects. Among those most relevant to our discussion are the Brahma Sutras, also known as the Vedanta Sutras, which systematize the teachings of the Upanishads, and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the foundational text of Raja Yoga. Building upon this vast ritual and mythological foundation, philosophical reflection within the Brahmanical tradition gradually evolved into systematic inquiry. From the early insights of the Upanishads, a range of schools emerged, seeking to define the nature of reality, knowledge, and liberation. Stimulated by intense debate with the contemporaneous shramana traditions, such as Buddhism and Jainism, and by the need to defend and reinterpret Vedic thought in a more rigorous form, these inquiries crystallized into the six classical Astika darshanas: Vedanta, Mimamsa, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Samkhya, and Yoga. Each offered a distinct philosophical perspective, yet accepted the authority of the Vedas, collectively strengthening the intellectual and theological foundations of Brahmanism and shaping the future course of Hindu philosophy. Among these six systems, each developed a distinctive approach to the pursuit of truth while maintaining fidelity to the Vedic revelation. Vedanta, emerging from the philosophical reflections of the Upanishads, interpreted their metaphysical insights into a coherent vision of Brahman, the ultimate reality, and the path to liberation through knowledge. Mimamsa focused on the ritual and ethical authority of the Vedas, affirming that precise performance of Vedic duties sustains cosmic order and human welfare. Nyaya and Vaisheshika together established the foundations of logic, epistemology, and metaphysics, providing Brahmanism with intellectual tools to engage rival schools such as Buddhism and Jainism. Samkhya presented a dualistic cosmology of Purusha, consciousness, and Prakriti, matter, forming the theoretical basis for yoga, which translated metaphysical insight into a practical discipline of mental and spiritual liberation. As we noted at the beginning of this video, Hindu thought developed its own systems of philosophical analysis, among them the various schools of Vedanta, which often provide a more suitable lens for understanding Hindu philosophy than Western frameworks. Over time, Vedanta emerged as one of the most influential of the six classical darshanas, eventually becoming one of the dominant philosophical frameworks of Hinduism. Rooted in the Upanishadic vision of Brahman as the ultimate reality, it offered a profound yet flexible system capable of integrating diverse religious, theological, and mystical ideas. Traditionally, what defines any system as truly Vedantic is its interpretation of the Brahma Sutras, the aphorisms composed by Badarayana, also known as Vyasa, that summarize and systematize the Upanishadic teachings. Today, there are six main and generally accepted schools of Vedanta. Through differing interpretations of the Brahma Sutras, these schools articulate distinct perspectives on the relationship between the individual soul, Atman, and the supreme reality, Brahman. So, among the classical schools of Vedanta, six principal systems became widely recognized. Advaita Vedanta, expounded by Adi Shankaracharya, teaches non-dualism, the ultimate identity of Atman and Brahman. The apparent multiplicity of the world is a product of Maya, or illusion, which veils the true, undivided nature of reality. Liberation, moksha, arises through the direct realization of this oneness. Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, formulated by Ramanuja, affirms qualified non-dualism. It maintains that Atman and Brahman are inseparably related, distinct yet united as parts within a divine whole. Brahman, identified with the personal god Vishnu, is the inner controller of all beings, and liberation is achieved through loving devotion, bhakti. Dvaita Vedanta, taught by Madhvacharya, presents a dualistic interpretation, holding that God, Vishnu, the soul, and the world are eternally distinct. The soul depends entirely on God for its existence and salvation, and devotion rooted in this understanding leads to liberation. Dvaita Advaita Vedanta, articulated by Nimbarka, proposes a doctrine of dualistic non-dualism, acknowledging both the unity and the difference between the soul and Brahman. The soul and matter are distinct from God, yet inseparable from Him, like sunlight from the sun. Shuddha Advaita Vedanta, developed by Vallabhacharya, emphasizes pure non-dualism. It rejects Maya as illusion and affirms the reality of the world as the divine manifestation of Krishna. liberation is attained through selfless love and participation in the divine play, Lila, of God. Finally, Achintya Bheda Abheda, or inconceivable oneness and difference, taught by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, synthesizes non-dualism and dualism by asserting that the soul and the world are simultaneously one with and different from God. This paradoxical relationship, beyond human logic, is realized through ecstatic devotion, bhakti, to Krishna. Together, these 6 Vedanta systems form a vast and multifaceted vision of reality, encompassing nearly every possible way of understanding the relationship between the human soul, the universe, and the divine, from absolute unity to eternal difference. The philosophical systems of Vedanta did not remain confined to theory. They gave rise to enduring religious lineages, sampradayas, and monastic centers, mathas or pithams, that continue to shape Hinduism to this day. Adi Shankaracharya, the foremost exponent of Advaita Vedanta, is traditionally credited with founding 4 principal monastic centers, Amnaya Pithams, to preserve and disseminate the non-dual teaching. Sringeri Sharada Pitham in the south, Karnataka; Dvaraka Sharada Pitham in the west, Gujarat; Jyotir Math, Joshimath in the north, Uttarakhand; and Govardhan Math, Puri, in the east, Odisha. Each was entrusted to one of his principal disciples and continues to be led by a line of pontiffs, Shankaracharyas, in unbroken succession through the principle of Guru Parampara, the direct transmission of teaching and authority from master to disciple. In parallel, other Vedantic systems developed their own distinct sampradayas. The Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, established by Ramanuja, institutionalized Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, centering worship on Vishnu and Lakshmi. Madhvacharya's Dvaita Vedanta inspired the Dvaita, or Madhva Sampradaya, whose headquarters at Udupi remains an important pilgrimage site. Nimbarka's Dvaita Advaita gave rise to the Nimbarka Sampradaya, emphasizing devotion to Radha Krishna. Vallabhacharya's Shuddhadvaita developed into the Pushtimarga, a devotional path focused on loving service or seva to Krishna as Srinathji. Finally, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Achintya Bheda Abheda formed the basis of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. Over time, these lineages expanded into numerous branches, temples, and teaching centers across India, evolving vibrant traditions of worship, commentary, and social organization. While the early Mathas maintained their teaching authority through the principle of Guru Parampara, the influence of Vedantic thought extended far beyond them. New devotional movements emerged that reinterpreted classical doctrines in light of regional and personal bhakti traditions, devotional path. Thus, from Ramanuja's Sri Vaishnavism arose related yet independent paths such as the Ramanandi Sampradaya, emphasizing devotion to Rama, and the Swaminarayan Sampradaya, which evolved from the Uddhava Sampradaya and developed a distinct theological system within the Vaishnava framework. Similarly, Madhva's Dvaita lineage inspired later devotional communities like the Haridasa movement, while Chaitanya's Gaudiya tradition flourished into new missionary institutions such as the Gaudiya Math and the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON. Over the centuries, while remaining the fundamental guide for philosophical inquiry into Brahman, Vedanta has also given rise to numerous sub-traditions and modern reinterpretations, such as the modern Vedanta articulated by Swami Vivekananda, which adapt its principles to new intellectual and cultural contexts. Alongside Vedanta, another of the 6 classical darshanas that achieved widespread influence is the philosophical and practical system of yoga. Raja Yoga, codified by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, offers a precise methodology for disciplining the mind and attaining direct realization of the self. While in the modern West, yoga is often understood primarily as a practice of physical postures and breathing exercises, these are only the third and fourth limbs, asana and pranayama, of Patanjali's eightfold path, known as Ashtanga Yoga, which constitutes the path of Raja Yoga. The first two limbs, yama, ethical restraints, and niyama, personal observances, form the indispensable foundation for all higher practice, purifying one's conduct and mind. The remaining four limbs, pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, and samadhi, absorption into pure consciousness, constitute the inward ascent of yoga, culminating in the realization of the self beyond all mental fluctuations. Thus, the classical yoga of Patanjali is far more than physical discipline. It is a comprehensive spiritual science aiming at liberation, kaivalya, through mastery of the mind. The Ashtanga yoga system revealed by Patanjali and briefly described here is in fact a classic, but not the only existing system identified with Raja Yoga. The term Raja Yoga more broadly designates the meditative path that seeks realization of the self or union with the divine through the control and stilling of the mind. Moreover, Raja Yoga is considered only one of the four principal paths of yoga, alongside Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, Karma Yoga, the path of selfless action, and Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. Though described separately, these four are not mutually exclusive. In most systems of practice, they naturally interweave, each balancing and enriching the others, leading the seeker toward the same ultimate realization of unity with the Supreme. Particular attention should also be paid to the path of bhakti, Bhakti Marga, the way of devotion, which has been no less influential than the mental discipline of Raja Yoga in shaping India's spiritual life. In one form or another, bhakti, devotion and loving service, is inherent in all traditions that feature chosen deities, rituals, and worship. As discussed earlier, the principal deities of Hinduism, Shiva, Vishnu, and Devi, along with their numerous manifestations, commonly serve as the chosen focus of devotion for bhaktas, devotees. Yet, in practice, devotion in the bhakti movement extends even further, embracing not only the countless forms of divine manifestation, but also the divine that transcends all form, reflecting the diversity and inclusiveness inherent in Hindu spirituality. Devotion also finds expression within the Smarta tradition, based on Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, where any personal deity, Ishta Devata, may be worshipped as a manifestation of the one impersonal Brahman. In this view, the many gods represent different facets of the same ultimate reality. Although bhakti exists in all forms of Hindu worship, its rise as a distinct, inclusive, and independent movement, with a particularly profound emphasis on personal devotion and an intimate relationship between the devotee and the divine, occurred around the 6th century Common Era, during the late Puranic and early medieval periods. Unlike the temple-centered ritualism of Brahmanism, with its dependence on priests and Varna-based restrictions, bhakti emphasized a direct personal relationship with the divine, expressed through love, surrender, and devotion to a chosen deity. Its early philosophical foundation is eloquently expressed in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna teaches that through pure devotion, Bhakti Yoga, the devotee attains the highest liberation. Before the rise of the Bhakti movement, Vaishnavism and Shaivism already contained elements of devotion, yet these were expressed mainly through temple ritual and philosophical theism rather than personal emotional worship. From the 6th century Common Era onward, Bhakti spread as a grassroots devotional movement throughout Tamil Nadu through the hymns of the Alvars, Vaishnavas, and Nayanars, Shaivas, bypassing Brahminical mediation. Their Tamil poetry made divine love accessible to all, both through intimate personal devotion and by inspiring worship in temples, shaping the southern traditions of Sri Vaishnavism and Shaiva Siddhanta. In neighboring Karnataka, the Virashaiva Lingayat movement, founded by Basavana in the 12th century, continued the Bhakti spirit with a strong social and reformist emphasis, rejecting caste and ritual orthodoxy. In Maharashtra, the Varkari saints, notably Jananeshwar, Namdev, and Tukaram, developed an intensely devotional mysticism centered on Vithoba, Vithala, a form of Vishnu, combining personal love for God with ethical simplicity and community worship. From these southern and western roots, Bhakti spread northward, inspiring a vast lineage of saints, poets, and mystics, Kabir, Mirabai, Tulsidas, Nanak, Ravidas, and many others, who proclaimed the universality of divine love beyond caste, ritual, or sectarian boundaries. In the north, Bhakti also absorbed strong Muslim and Sufi influences, giving rise to distinctive and often non-conventional forms of devotion within various Sant sects and movements. In many of these northern Sant traditions, devotion was directed toward the Nirguna, attributeless aspect of God, invoked under a multitude of possible names and epithets such as Ram, Satnam, Vaheguru, Nirankar, Allah Purush, Akal Purach, Anami, and others, thus expanding far beyond the familiar Hindu pantheon, centered on the Trimurti and Tridevi. In this sense, the traditions of the northern Sants often defy easy classification within the orthodox, Astika, Hindu fold. Some Sants openly rejected both belonging to Hinduism and the authority of the Vedas, aligning themselves more closely with the heterodox, Nastika streams. The Sikh religion itself arose from this vibrant circle of northern Sants, as evidenced by the Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh sacred collection of hymns, which includes verses from numerous Sants, both northern and from other parts of India. Although only Guru Nanak succeeded in formulating a teaching that eventually evolved into an independent and widely recognized religion, Sikhism, this distinct identity took shape gradually, reaching its full expression with Guru Gobind Singh's founding of the Khalsa in 1699 and the later establishment of the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. These developments gave the Sikh community both spiritual and political sovereignty, securing its recognition as a separate faith. At the same time, many other related, beautiful, and distinctive traditions and sects also emerged from the northern Sant milieu. These are generally grouped under the broad designation of Sant Mat and include the Satnami, Radha Swami, and various panths such as Kabir Panth, Dadu Panth, and Ravidasya, among others. Within the philosophical framework of Vedanta, as we may recall, several important schools are also explicitly rooted in Bhakti and influenced by the broader Bhakti movement. These include Nimbarka's Dvaita Advaita, dualistic non-dualism, Vallabhacharya's Shuddha Advaita, pure non-dualism, and Chaitanya's Achintya Bheda Abheda, inconceivable oneness and difference, as well as the Haridasa Bhakti tradition that arose from Madhva's Dvaita philosophy. The Sri Vaishnava lineage, deeply shaped by the devotional hymns of the Tamil Alvars, gave rise to later Bhakti-oriented sampradayas such as the Ramanandi and Swaminarayan traditions. Each of these systems articulates the relationship between the individual soul and the divine in distinct devotional terms. Through the Bhakti movement, the previously rigorous metaphysical insights of the Upanishads were thus transformed into a deeply personal, emotional, and accessible spirituality, one that united philosophical reflection, religious experience, and social inclusiveness in one of the most enduring expressions of the Hindu faith. But also, you need to understand that the conception of Hinduism as a single, coherent, world religion took clearer form only in the 19th and 20th centuries, under the combined influences of British colonial classification and Indian reform movements. Figures such as Ramohan Roy, Dayananda Saraswati, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo played key roles in articulating this modern synthesis, emphasizing the Vedas, Upanishads, and Vedanta as the unifying foundation of Hindu spirituality. A comprehensive picture of Indian spirituality extends beyond the simplified diagrams and generalized frameworks presented here, while the true spiritual life of India unfolds through countless living traditions, experiences, and realizations. Living Bharata is home to innumerable saints, gurus, mystics, ascetics, and yogis whose direct and unconventional experiences transcend theoretical concepts, continually revitalizing established traditions with new revelations and profound insights. Such spiritual luminaries have appeared in every age, region, and community. Indeed, it is not without reason that Bharata, the Sanskrit name for India, is poetically translated as the land of saints or the land of sages. In response to profound spiritual quests and the need to reconcile ancient wisdom with modern life, new interpretations of Indian philosophy emerged, what is now sometimes termed Neo-Vedanta or Neo-Hinduism. Figures such as Ramakrishna, 1836 to 1886, embodied a living synthesis of diverse religious paths, demonstrating through direct experience the essential unity underlying them all. His life and realization inspired a renewal of devotional and contemplative practices that deeply influenced modern spiritual thought. Similarly, Sai Baba of Shirdi, 1838 to 1918, united elements of both Hindu and Muslim traditions, teaching simplicity, compassion, and the immediacy of divine experience beyond sectarian boundaries. In a more philosophical vein, Sri Aurobindo, 1872 to 1950, developed a dynamic vision of spiritual evolution and divine life, integrating classical Vedanta with modern psychological and evolutionary perspectives. Through the guidance of many spiritual teachers and gurus, spiritual knowledge has become more accessible, and its expressions are countless. But within this diversity, the light of Dharma remains. Finally, it's worth emphasizing that Hinduism cannot be fully explained by strict formal theology alone. Rather, it is the interweaving of philosophical lineages, mythological narratives, local practices, the teachings of saints and sages, and the influence of historical and social factors, including caste stratification and regional identities, that gives rise to the rich and evolving mosaic of sects and spiritual traditions in India. The spiritual landscape of India encompasses both the classical schools of Vedantic philosophy with their sampradayas and a wide array of panths, sects, and traditions that lie outside the formal framework of Vedanta. Here, Vedic traditions intersect with ancient folk beliefs, regional deities, the unique mystical experiences of realized saints, and even external influences such as Islam and Sufi currents, particularly in northern India. This confluence has given rise not only to the internal diversity of Hinduism itself, but has also contributed to the emergence of distinct religious traditions like Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. Indian religious traditions thus form a vast interwoven field of philosophical thought and spiritual practice, shaped by centuries of reflection, local customs, oral transmission, and inner inquiry. Here, Dharma serves as the guiding principle that manifests in diverse forms, sometimes through orthodox Vedic systems, at other times through heterodox movements and sects. Some paths affirm a personal deity, approached through devotion and ritual, while others seek the impersonal absolute through knowledge and contemplation, a contrast that beautifully illustrates the inclusive and multifaceted nature of India's spiritual heritage.